This episode is brought to you by the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership, in partnership with the Weill Cornell Graduate School of Medical Sciences. The future of healthcare needs motivated and business-minded leaders who are equipped to facilitate change from within their organization and throughout the industry at large. Offered on the weekend in New York City, the Cornell Executive MBA MS in Healthcare Leadership is the only dual degree of its kind, combining business breadth and healthcare depth with world-class faculty instruction and an unmatched alumni network. Take the next step towards driving innovation in the healthcare industry by connecting with their admissions team. Search Cornell EMBA-MS to start your journey. Maricella, you and I have had the great honor of hosting some Ellevate roundtables lately. Can you tell me more about your roundtable?
Sure. I've been hosting the Managers Roundtable, which we get together every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern to talk for an hour. It's about 15 minutes of a guest expert talking about a certain topic. So everything about how to address performance issues with your team, or how to talk compensation with your team as a manager, or even how to build more authentic workplace within your team structure. And then we go into breakout rooms where people can ask questions and have conversations. So it's a really great place for all of us who we want to be managers that are building inclusive places. We want to be good at being there for our teams. And sometimes you can't really just Google you can Google how to be a good manager, but there are questions you might have that you can't really just find online. The best way to really get answers is to talk it through with others who might be in similar situations. So that's what we do at the Managers Roundtable. They're a lot of fun.
Maricella, that sounds amazing. And for any of our listeners who are managers of teams or want to become a manager and start having these important conversations, we invite you to check it out. Go to ellevatenetwork.com, where you'll find a list of all of our roundtables, including managers, those in career transition, executives, and rising leaders. And if you use the code ELEVATEPOD, you'll get 50% off the cost of attending. So check it out now, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast. Conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Hey Maricella, how you doing?
Hey Kristy, I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing good, and I'm excited for our guest today. Avil Beckford is a mainstay of the Ellevate community. She has been a local leader in Toronto for years. I see her every week at our executive roundtable. She is a big participant and contributor to that community as well. And someone who is generous with her time, her knowledge, her passion, and her story. And my interview with Avil today, we cover so many things around storytelling, reading and education, finding your passion, and just being part of a community.
She is great. I've known Avil for years, and I'm so excited that she's going to be on the podcast. She's such an inspiration, both on doing your own thing, going and carving your path as an entrepreneur, but also just such a community builder. So I'm really, really happy that she's going to be part of this today.
Excellent. Well, let's get to my conversation with Avil. Avil, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
Of course. I mean, Avil, you and I have known each other for quite some time. You have been a central part of Ellevate in Toronto and building that community and supporting professional women in Toronto. And then more recently, during the pandemic, as we've been hosting our executive roundtables every week, You are the best, face to show up on my screen. You're always there supporting others in our community and building these connections and inspiration and advice. And so I'm so thankful to you for being a part of what we have here at Ellevate, and for not just being a passive participant, but really actively engaged with supporting others.
I love what the organization stands for, and it's very important to lift women up. And it's interesting because I'm doing the One Problem podcast, and people are telling me that's a platform to elevate women, and I wasn't even thinking about it that way, but it is.
Well, so tell me more about the One Problem podcast. I had the great pleasure of being on it, but where did the idea come from, and what are some of the conversations you're having on the podcast?
So that's interesting because sometimes ideas just pop into my head, and I guess last December I was on this webinar where they were talking about building 1 year's worth of content in 6 hours. And this idea came to me, and it took a few months for me to get started. And part of the issue was that I'm not that comfortable on video. And then after a while, I decided, the pandemic, no one looks that great and they're going for it. So I just started it. But I thought that it would be interesting. I'm thinking I don't like listening to most podcasts because they're too long. And because I guess I'm more visual, so sometimes audio puts me to sleep. So I'm thinking, what kind of podcast would I want? And I'm thinking it could be one that's a little bit shorter. So I thought it would be really cool to have this entire thing be done in 10 minutes. So we can learn from everyone. So I thought that it would be good to ask people to talk about a problem or challenge and then offer solution, and it just seemed to work, and people are resonating with it. I met someone on lunch club, and I told him about the podcast, and he signed up on YouTube. And a couple days later, at that time I had only 20 episodes, and he said to me, I've listened to 60 episodes already and I'm learning so much because they're so short. So I guess I'm having some sort of impact.
Oh, that's so exciting. What are some of the topics your guests have covered?
Okay, so an Ellevate sister, she talked about how to remain relevant as you age. There have been some about how to live life without regrets. And there's one that is touching people, and it has to do with something that's very topical, and that's mental health. When she was younger, she had issues. And as she grew older, she said, oh, I'm over that. And then it imploded, and she was on an airplane when all of this came to head. And she's thinking, how can I deal with this? So people are dealing with talking about some topical stuff. Another person talked about innovative hybrid workplace policies. And I've been talking to a few people, and they don't want to go back into the office. So this we're having some really good conversations about things that matter.
They do matter, and it's so many of these topics that you're talking about are top of mind for many of us. What does the future of work look like, and how do we support ourselves and others, from a mental health standpoint? How is the world impacting us? And you're giving voice to, I think, many who don't often have that platform to have their perspective heard, to share their story. And it's really important that we use these tools and communities that we're part of to amplify other voices. So thank you for that work.
And that's so interesting because another one that had a lot of impact and people are chiming in on LinkedIn is respect for women in the workplace. And that is something that we talk about in Ellevate all the time.
It is. And we wish we didn't have to keep talking about this, but we do. And, and part of that too is when you think about workplaces, and particularly being intentional about intersectional identities and different experiences and backgrounds. It's going to be an ongoing learning process. It's an ongoing journey. We have to keep having these conversations to raise awareness, to put in the work, and to understand more deeply, how our colleagues are being impacted by the workplace, and what we can do to best support them.
And I just want to say that I'm so appreciative of Elevate. I'm an introvert, and sometimes going to a networking event is just so much angst, so much stuff going inside of me to put on your game face. And in Elevate, I can just show up and I can be who I am. And if there's one good thing we can say that came out of the pandemic, is that it forced many of us to strip off the mask.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm an introvert as well, and it did feel that way. I mean, walking into a room sometimes, or a networking event, even a conference room for a meeting, you feel like you have to put on all this armor, and and brace yourself to, what are you going to say, and how are you going to keep the conversation going, and how are you going to make this work. And in the spaces we've created at Ellevate, which, personally have had just a huge impact and support for me on an individual level, it is like that. Like, I feel like I can show up sometimes and I don't have to contribute, other than listening. And listening is a contribution, but I don't always have to be on. I can be there just to be a part of something and to feel supported. And I'm really proud of that. And I think, it's something we all need more of. It's just those safe spaces.
And the women do care because I was at one of those round tables and I wasn't saying anything. And then afterwards, someone emailed me and said to me, "Are you okay? You weren't saying anything. I'm a little bit concerned." And that felt so good because I wasn't feeling great. It was after I had my shot and I wasn't reacting great, but I didn't want to miss Elevate Roundtable. And someone picked up on that. And I'm thinking people really do care.
Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. Amal, I want to take a step back and learn a little bit more about you and your story. Would you mind sharing that with our listeners?
Sure. So I guess some people know that I was born in Jamaica. I went to high school there and I left Jamaica and went to Calgary to study. And it's interesting because it was a major cultural change for me because I'd never traveled before. And I remember arriving in the middle of August and I got so sick because it felt so cold to me and I had fever and everything. So, after I finished my schooling, I decided that I was going to check out the US. So I went to New York and I lived there for almost 2 years. And it was just too fast for me. So I came back to Canada and was intending to go back to Calgary when I met some folks that I know. And they said, you're not married or anything. Why don't you try Toronto? And I've been in Toronto over 20 years now. So, yeah. So it's not as fast as New York, but it's a lot faster than Calgary. So I feel comfortable here. But one of the things is that in 2013, when I was going through a grieving process, my mom had died and it wasn't expected. She died from a heart attack suddenly. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is like the end of the world. And I'm thinking to myself, what can I do to ride through this process? So I was thinking that I needed to do something that I love, which is reading. So I created a reading challenge for myself called Read the World. So I was reading books written by authors from all over the world. And I made sure that I stopped on each continent. And one of the things, it was such a great experience for me because I started learning more about intercultural relationships. I started learning about the different cultures because a lot of times when you're reading fiction, you have these characters and you can learn a lot from the way they live their lives. So that was a really big turning point for myself. And then I made a decision then and there that I would always try to read the world to learn more about people. So that was one of the big things for me.
And what were some of your favorite books that you read during that time?
Okay, there was one that was set in Laos. And I thought it was interesting because it's something that happened all the time. So this person was placed in a position that he wasn't qualified for. And he was actually placed in that situation because they were hoping that he would fail. So here's this doctor. He wasn't even a great doctor, and all of a sudden he had to, he had to be working with dead bodies, and he made a commitment to himself that he would learn. And while this man is, it maybe sound a little bit morbid, but while this man is conducting an autopsy, he's actually reading a manual on how to do it, and he ended up becoming very good at it. And I think in organizations, how many times we get put into situations that we have to grow into. And some people may rise to the challenge and some people may fold. So I think that was a really great lesson there.
Yeah, that is a great lesson. When you were going, reading the world, were there areas that were lacking in representation, where you had a hard time finding books to really engage with?
Yeah, and one of the things that I actually did, I went to a bookstore that I love here, and they made some recommendations. Some of them I ended up not liking the book, but you always gain something from every book you read. And some of those books were really difficult. And one of the things I realized is that when you're reading book or going through like a challenge that I created for myself, the order in which you read the books are just as important. Because what was happening was that as reading too many difficult books one after the other, instead of interspersing them with some that are lighter, because there was one called Hunger, and this guy is talking about being hungry and started chewing on his hand, and that's really tough. And there was another one when someone was in a refugee camp, and I don't know, it was really hard on me. Even though it was a growth experience, it was also very difficult. And I guess you grow through challenges. So I guess that's one of the way I was growing. So yes. So yeah, I got a lot of help in selecting some of these books, but some of them were just really tough reading.
And Emma, I know that you're incredibly passionate about supporting others on their reading journey, and particularly, business books, which could seem dry or not really what you want to dive into when you'd rather be reading, a mystery novel or something. But you've done a lot to share all of your learnings and your approach with employees and companies and communities to help others really embark on this reading journey. What are some of those key takeaways that you share about reading and the approach to reading?
People tell me three main reasons why they don't like to read. They don't have the time, they cannot focus, and they don't remember what they're reading. So the way we're taught to read is to read a book from beginning to end. And I'm saying no, don't do that with nonfiction books, right? A lot of times when you go to a nonfiction book, you're looking for a solution to a problem, or you have questions that you're looking for the answers. So treat your nonfiction books in those ways. So there is a reading methodology called leadership reading, where you read to learn what you need to know. So essentially, what I train senior leaders on is to read a book in such a way that shaves hours of their reading time, but to read with purpose. And then I help them navigate to show them how to figure out which parts of the book to read. So all of a sudden, time is no longer an issue. Focus is no longer an issue. Remember, you remember more because it's an active form of reading. And I guess the biggest challenge to that is that fear of missing out. People are thinking that if they don't read a book cover to cover, they're gonna miss important pieces. And I say to them, an educator by the name of Russell Stoffel, he did a study and he found that on the average page of a nonfiction book, only 4 to 11% of the text carries meaning. Kristy, that's about one sentence that put things into perspective. So you're not missing anything out. The other thing is that publishers have word counts. So sometimes an author, in order to satisfy the word count, he has to pad it, add all these extra case studies and examples. Why should you read 30 case studies and example when two or three will do? So when I say things like that, it puts it into perspective for people, and they do realize, and they'll think back to some books that they read and they say, you're right, I read this book and I didn't have to read because it's all this repetition. So there's some books that I keep on recommending all the time. And even though a few years has passed, like one is called The Three Gaps by Hiram Smith. Now, that book, when you finish reading that book, you have all you need to create your personal constitution, your core values to guide you. There's another one that I read this year called Turn the Page, and it's an example of how to read, and that's where I got the language leadership reading. I used to call it strategic reading and selective reading, and then I learned this and I said, oh my god, this sounds much nicer. And he said it more elegantly, so now I call it leadership reading. It's the exact same thing I'm doing, but he was calling it something that was more elegant.
Yeah, I love reading. I mean, you and I have talked about this, but reading is in it's my safe space, or my, how I can decompress. It's something, for myself. And so I tend to skew more towards fiction. But I had set a goal for myself that I wanted to read more nonfiction this year. And really, your approach, I think, gave it a completely different perspective in my eyes, because you start to think, yeah, like, why am I reading this book? What do I want to take out of it? You read, look at the table of contents. What are the areas that are most relevant to you? And you can pick the areas that are of most interest or most relevant. And so thinking about it that way feels so much less daunting. It's like, okay, I can schedule like an hour in my schedule and get through a bunch of a book and really learn things. Whereas before, my approach was, okay, I'm going to need like 3 days to make it through this book, and then I would never do it. And so I really appreciate that change in perspective, because I think it's opened up my eyes and many others to, how approachable and how easy it is to really consume this type of information using your tools.
And I like the language you're using because it's absolutely right. Cherry picking. That's so cool. And I read a really interesting book a couple days ago. It's not a business book, but it has so much to offer. And I'm not quite sure how they pronounce it, but I think it's called Ikigai.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah, it was such a fantastic book because they were talking about some Japanese who live really long, and they interviewed them. And the reason is that community is a big thing for them, doing things with people. And I was thinking about the Elevate community, where we see each other every week. And also, not return. You have to, Ikigai means your reason for being. They talk about exercising, and it's a short book, but it made me think.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why we do this, like to think, to understand different perspectives, to expand our minds. I mean, just as you talked about the world tour you did, but continue to use books as a pathway into different cultures and different experiences, different identities, to learn from others. I mean, there's such power and wisdom there, and a lot of it is aligning your purpose, like the impact you want to have in the world. Is there, like, what is the need, what does the world need? And that's something we talk about at Ellevate a lot as well, because we're looking to find meaning in the work that we do, to really be fulfilled, not just professionally but personally as well. And you need safe spaces to talk that through, to explore it, to learn from others. I mean, it doesn't happen, it's not always this overnight process. And so I love that you mentioned that. But Avil, I'm curious, like your purpose, because you, to me, feel like someone who's so committed to creating conversation and change in this world. And how did you really align with this purpose that you've identified?
Okay, so one of my mission is to get 5,000 professionals reading a book each week. It's slow going, but one of the ways I do that is through my Facebook group. So right now, I've done a few challenges where you read a book a day for 30 days, and I actually train the participants. This month, we did something different, and I saw it on Instagram, and I changed it. And it's a rainbow reading challenge. So you're reading 7 books in 30 days, but each book has to be a color of the rainbow. So it's challenging people, and you can't read fiction, it has to be nonfiction. So that's been interesting. So I'm not following the rainbow in any order. So I'm reading a book called Leader In. It's my orange book. And that's given me some interesting perspectives on leadership. So it's been challenging people to come up with meaningful books. And I want to backtrack a little. You talk about, have a conversations, talking about things that are meaningful. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that someone was looking at people who were no awarded the Nobel Prize. And to get a Nobel Prize, you have to do work that matters. So that's one of the key things. There are lots of other things. So some people may be slogging away doing things, that's enjoyable and entertaining. But, for the people who get awarded those kinds of prizes, they do work that matter. And I think that Elevate is doing work that matters in trying to tackle something as big as, looking at the gender achievement gap, the wage gap, and all of that. Yeah.
Well, that is a very admirable purpose. Avil, I wanted to end just with a couple questions to get to know you better. So, what is your favorite day of the week?
Oh my God, I've never thought about that. Let's say it's Thursday because I was born on a Thursday.
Oh, I like that. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Oh, well, I'm an early bird with a caveat. Even though I'm an early bird, I don't want to talk to anyone before 9 o'clock. I just want to do my own thing. And I think it's that introvert part of me coming out.
Sure, that makes sense. Who would be your dream dinner guest?
Hmm, you know, I think it would be someone like Elon Musk. Okay, I like Elon Musk for one reason. Okay, one reason. And that's the way he reads. That's why I like him, because he has a unique way of reading. So I would talk to him about how he reads.
Right. That sounds good. Do you have any pet peeves?
You know something? I try not to focus on stuff like that, so they've disappeared.
What do you need to get your morning started off on the right foot?
Okay, so when I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is read my Bible, and then I pray, and then I meditate.
That sounds like a great way to get the day started, to really center yourself around your intentions. Do you have any other self care practices?
Oh, I love to walk. Where I live, when you look through the window, you can see the Toronto waterfront. So I love to walk along the Toronto waterfront. You never know what you'll see. I'll see swans, I'll see the Canada geese, I'll see the seagulls, I'll see people playing beach volleyball when the weather is nice. So you never know what you'll see.
Have you gotten used to the Toronto winters, Avil?
Well, you know something? It's the Toronto winter is like a walk in the park compared to Calgary. When I was in Calgary, there was 1 month where every day with the windshield factor, it was minus 30 degrees. I don't want to go back to that. Yeah.
Yeah. And what is a final thought you want to leave with our listeners here today?
You know, when people say they don't have time to read, if you read the way that I recommend, by reading with a purpose, reading what you need then and there, then you can make the time to read.
And Avil, how can our listeners find you? Find your Facebook group or learn more about the work that you do?
Well, I guess the best way would be to connect with me on LinkedIn. Every social media channel, my username is Avil Beckford, so you can find me. You can drop me a message, and if there's anything I said that resonates with you, if you want to join the Facebook group, just contact me on LinkedIn because that's probably the easiest way.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Avil, for being part of our podcast here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.